A 900-kilogram bison drops to its knees on a Dutch sand dune and starts rolling. The ground shakes. Sand sprays in every direction. The animal grinds its massive body against the dune surface, churning the ground into a shallow crater of exposed sand, and then stands, shakes itself off, and walks away. Yvonne Kemp, watching from the ridge with a clipboard, writes down the time. She has been waiting for this. What she has not told her colleagues yet is what she suspects this single behavior, repeated across 330 hectares by 3 animals working through every night, is going to do to 40 years of received wisdom about where bison can live and what they can fix. In 2007, the scientific community was unanimous. Bison were forest animals. They had always been forest animals. The literature said so. The data said so. Everyone who had ever published a paper on bison said so. Releasing 3 of them onto open coastal sand dunes between Haarlem and the North Sea, with no supplementary winter feeding, no managed diet, no safety net, was not a serious conservation intervention. It was, as one ecologist put it directly, the crazy Dutch experiment. What those 3 animals did to a coastline that decades of professional management had failed to restore is the reason that Sweden, Switzerland, and the United Kingdom are now looking at their own dunes and asking a question nobody thought to ask before 2007. The dunes were not the problem. The dunes were the answer. And here is what was actually dying inside them before the bison arrived. The coastal dunes of the Netherlands are one of Europe's most biodiverse landscapes. 70% of the Dutch flora can be found in dune systems. 15% of the plant species in Dutch coastal dunes exist nowhere else in the country. Specialist insects, reptiles, rare amphibians, and dozens of bird species depend on a specific condition the dune systems provide. Open sand. Not grass-covered sand, not scrub-covered sand. Bare, dynamic, wind-disturbed sand that shifts and settles and creates the kind of constantly changing microhabitat that specialist species evolved to use. For decades, that open sand had been disappearing. Without large animals to disturb the dune surface, coarse grasses and encroaching shrubs had been locking the ground in place. The process had a name, vegetation encroachment, and its consequences were measurable and accelerating. As the grass and shrub layer thickened, the specialist plants that could not compete with tall vegetation disappeared. As the specialist plants disappeared, the insects that depended on them followed. As the insects declined, the birds and reptiles that fed on them contracted to smaller and smaller fragments of suitable habitat. The dunes looked green and healthy from a distance. Underneath the canopy of grass and shrub, they were becoming ecologically empty. PWN, the water company responsible for managing the North Holland Dune Reserve, had spent years trying to reverse this. Cattle were grazed across parts of the reserve. Manual clearance teams cut back encroaching vegetation. The results were local and temporary. The scale of the problem, thousands of hectares of coastline steadily losing its dynamic character, exceeded what any combination of domestic livestock and human labor could address at the pace the ecosystem required. Yvonne Kemp and her colleagues at PWN and ARC Nature looked at the problem from a different angle. The dunes were missing something, not just any grazer, but a large, heavy, behaviorally complex animal capable of producing the kind of physical disturbance that domestic cattle and managed clearance could not replicate. An animal that had shaped European landscapes for hundreds of thousands of years before humans removed it. The European bison was extinct in the Netherlands. It had been gone from the country for centuries, and every ecologist who had studied it in the forests of Białowieża in Poland, where the last surviving wild population had clung on through the 20th century. Nobody had ever asked what a bison would do on open dunes. In the spring of 2007, 3 European bison, 2 females and 1 male, sourced from established breeding programs, were released into Kransvlak, a 330-hectare section of the Zuid-Kennemerland National Park between Overveen and Zandvoort. The release came with a condition that set the project apart from virtually every other bison reintroduction in Europe. No supplementary feeding. Not in summer, not in winter, not at any point. If the bison could not find enough food in the dunes to survive a Dutch winter on their own, the experiment would produce a clear answer about the limits of dune habitat for the species. If they could, it would produce something more valuable. Evidence that bison ecology was far broader than 40 years of forest-based research suggested. The bison did not wait for instructions. Within weeks of release, Kemp's monitoring team began documenting behaviors that the forest-focused literature had described, but that nobody had observed at this scale in an open landscape. The bison sand-bathed constantly, rolling their massive bodies against the dune surface, churning the ground into shallow depressions that exposed bare sand. Each wallow was small in isolation. Across hundreds of hectares, the cumulative effect was a network of open sand patches distributed across the dune in patterns that no management intervention had ever produced. Wind caught the loose sand at the edges of each wallow and carried it further, creating what geomorphologists call blowouts, expanding areas of dynamic, bare dune that moved and shifted with each storm. The bison had not just disturbed the ground, they had restarted the physical processes that make coastal dunes ecologically functional. But the sand bathing was only the beginning. The bison also stripped bark from shrubs and small trees, the same behavior that had made them controversial in forest reintroductions, where foresters worried about damage to commercially valuable timber. On the dunes, there were no commercial trees. The shrubs the bison targeted were sea buckthorn and other encroaching species that had been choking the dune surface. Each stripped shrub was a weakened plant, less able to compete for the ground it had colonized. Each fallen branch was dead wood, habitat for beetles and other invertebrates that the closed shrub canopy had not supported. The bison grazed selectively, moving through the dune in patterns that created a mosaic of different vegetation heights and densities across the same 330 hectares that a single management regime could never have produced. And then the insects arrived. Kemp's team documented what happened in the bare sand patches the bison created with a precision that the monitoring program had been designed to capture. Specialist insects, species that require open sand for burrowing, for thermoregulation, for egg-laying, colonized the wallow sites within a single season. Reptiles moved into the sun-warmed sand patches to bask. Pioneer plant species, the early colonizers that cannot compete with established grass and shrub, but that form the foundation of a functioning dune food web, established in the disturbed ground around each wallow. The bison had not been asked to restore the dune's invertebrate community. They had done it as a consequence of rolling in the sand. One puzzle nagged at the researchers from the beginning, and its resolution changed the conversation about bison across Europe. Every bison reintroduction program in existence at the time provided supplementary winter feeding. The assumption was biological and seemingly reasonable. Bison were forest animals, adapted to a high biomass woodland diet, and open landscapes in northern Europe could not support them through winter without human intervention. Kranzvlak's no supplementary feeding condition was considered by most bison ecologists to be the experiment's most likely point of failure. When the first winter arrived and the 3 bison remained in good condition, the monitoring team recorded it carefully but cautiously. One winter proved nothing. When the second winter passed the same way, and the third, and the herd began to grow, the first calf was born in 2008, and more calves followed in subsequent years. The scientific community's response shifted from skepticism to attention. The results, published in the journal Restoration Ecology in 2018, confirmed what Kemp's team had been observing for a decade. European bison could survive and reproduce in semi-open dune landscapes without supplementary feeding. Their diet in Kranzvlak consisted of more than 65% grasses, the same grasses that were overrunning the dune surface, supplemented by herbs, shrubs, and woody vegetation. The dune system that had been considered unsuitable for bison was in fact providing everything that 3 bison, then 10, then 22 bison needed to thrive across all 4 seasons. The implications moved through the European rewilding community faster than the paper's publication date. Yvonne Kemp described the shift directly. For decades, the prevailing view had been that the European bison was a forest animal. The Kranzvlak team had never been fully convinced of that, and the data from the dunes resolved the uncertainty. By 2016, 2 more Dutch bison reintroduction sites had launched, using the Kranzvlak protocol as their template. Nature organizations in Sweden, Switzerland, and the United Kingdom began looking at dune and semi-open landscapes in their own countries that had previously been excluded from bison reintroduction consideration. Knowledge from Kranzvlak was being shared actively with established projects in Spain, France, and Germany. A species whose reintroduction range had been defined entirely by forest availability had, in the space of a decade, become a candidate for a far larger portion of Europe's degraded coastline. By 2025, more than 25 bison had been born in Kranzvlak. The herd that had started with 3 animals was contributing genetics to bison conservation programs across Europe, with animals exchanged between Kranzvlak and bison populations in other countries to maintain the genetic diversity that the species needed after its near extinction in 1927. The dunes that had been slowly losing their ecological character to grass and shrub encroachment were producing open sand patches, pioneer vegetation, and specialist invertebrate communities in areas where managers had failed to create them for decades. And the water company that had funded the experiment, PWN, whose primary mandate was managing drinking water infrastructure, not wildlife conservation, had produced one of the most cited rewilding case studies in European ecological literature. There is a walking trail in Kranzvlak that passes through the bison area between Haarlem and the North Sea. On a winter morning, when the wind comes off the water and the dune grass bends flat against the sand, you might find a wallow, a shallow depression in the dune surface, its edges loose and wind-worked, pioneer plants already pushing up through the disturbed ground at its margins. The bison that made it may be out of sight, moving through the scrub somewhere in the reserve's 330 hectares, but the wallow is there, and in it are the insects and the bare sand and the early succession plants that the dune had been losing for 40 years before 3 animals arrived and started rolling in the dirt. Nobody told them the dunes needed that. They just did what bison do. And it turned out that what bison do was exactly what the dunes had been missing. But the Netherlands is not the only place where releasing a large animal into a landscape that experts said was wrong, for it produced results the experts had not predicted. In our next video, we travel to England, where in 2015, 8 beavers were released into a dead stretch of river in Devon that flood engineers had given up on. What those 8 animals built from mud and sticks in the months that followed forced the British government to rewrite its wildlife law and to allow beavers to return to the rivers of England. If you thought 3 bison rebuilding a coastline that decades of management had failed to restore was unexpected, wait until you see what 8 rodents did to 30 years of flood data. You will not look at rivers the same way again.